When Sinclair announced their cheap mass storage device, the ZX Microdrive, it was a good idea. Delays in production, though, meant that the impetus was lost and interest decreased. Delivery problems meant that by the time the device was actually available, people were now accustomed to the slow tape cassette media, and the chance to set a standard was lost. Interface 1 that was needed for the Microdrive also had other functions. You could connect a serial printer to it, and in theory you could connect any serial device, providing there were drivers for it. It also allowed multiple spectrums to be connected together to form a local network. This was aimed at schools, so a teacher could have the master unit and be able to send files to up to 64 other spectrums at the same time, instead of having to load each one via tape. Sinclair lost the education deal to Acorn, and so the networking function was largely ignored. There are a few games that use it, things like Hunter Killer from Protec, but the cost of the interface meant fairly low sales in the games market. I thought I would set up a network and see how it all works. To set up, you obviously need 2 spectrums or more, each with interface 1. You do not have to have microdrives on every spectrum though, as data can be sent via the network. I set up 2 machines, both with interface 1, one having the V drive, a modern replacement for the microdrive, and the other having the Pico MD, another modern alternative. To join the 2 together, you plug in the network cable, provided by Sinclair with interface 1, into either of the connections at the back. You turn on both machines, and now you can set up the master device. To do this, you use the format command. Format n:1 will set up device 1, format n:2 will set up device 2, and onwards. I also learnt by trial and error that you sometimes have to use the format command before any network operation. This caused me a lot of problems until I realised this. If you only have 2 spectrums connected, this can be bypassed however, as both machines will automatically be set to device 1, but for now I'm going to set them up as 1 and 2 for demonstration purposes. Let's try and load something and send it across then. Here is a simple basic program that just prints out a message. I type in the command on both spectrums, one to save and the other to load. And it zooms across the network pretty quickly. That's not too bad really, very impressive. Now let's be a bit more adventurous. In the Interface 1 manual, there's a chat program to type in. Once typed in, on Spectrum 1, I can send it across to the second one, and with a few alterations to the program to make it work better, I could start my chat. I could see how this would be great fun in a classroom environment, although the teacher probably wouldn't be too happy. Obviously, as the second spectrum now has the code, it can also be saved to Microdrive for use later. Let's try something bigger then. How about a type-in called Star Swarm? Again, I load it into Spectrum 1 first, and then save it to Spectrum 2 across the network. And it flies across. I can now save it to Microdrive on the second spectrum if I needed. And for a bit of fun, let's run both programs at the same time. No reason, just for a laugh. Apart from basic programs, you can also send data this way, using Interface 1's streams, if you really wanted to get complicated. And that's how the chat program worked. Now to use this in a classroom environment, there is an option to broadcast to all spectrums on the network. To do this, you set the device to 0 when sending or receiving, and all spectrums will get whatever is sent across the network. A nice feature. On the Sinclair demo cartridge, there is a game called NetGame. Let's load this up on both machines and have a go. You enter your name on both machines, and you enter a number that the other player has to guess. Each player can now try and guess the other's secret number, and you are told whether you are close, very close, or far away. Yes, it's simple, but it does demonstrate how multiple machines can talk to each other over the network. Eventually, I guess my own number. There's a surprise. Now, the downside to this is that commercial games can't really be sent, as they are protected, and usually in machine code. Early games that let you break into the loader and see where the code is may work, I suppose, but it would be cumbersome. When you're sending across the network, you can't send things like code, starting address, or even screens. Commercial games that took advantage of the networking feature were very few, and both spectrums had to load the game independently. Hunter-Killer, as mentioned before from Protec, let each player battle it out, very slowly, and it was not really inspiring. Now, TT Racer from Digital Integration allows up to 7 other players to race across the network. Pretty impressive. Sadly, the game has lens lock protection, which, as we all know, isn't really fun, and usually doesn't work anyway. Luckily, there are tap files that exist that don't need it. Once it's loaded on both machines, it will display the setup screen, and here you can select the device number for each spectrum, and whether it's master or terminal. When the game starts, the two machines will try and communicate with each other, and hopefully you'll then be able to start. It's very difficult trying to demonstrate this on my own, but eventually you can see that I catch myself up and overtake myself several times. There I go. I can see this being really exciting if 2 or more people were in the same room. I'm not 2 people, however, and I had to demonstrate it to you myself. Oh well. A few modern titles were released, but usually board games. There's a Connect 4 game and a Battleships game called Admiral. Sadly, the network feature was not really used to any great advantage, and it was limited by what you could actually do. I have seen messages on various forums asking if this feature could be implemented in emulators and work across the internet, maybe with something like SpectraNet or other similar device. The last time I checked, the discussion was still ongoing. An interesting function, built into every Interface 1, aimed at the education market and hardly ever used in games. It was an interesting thing to mess about with, though. As we looked at this game earlier on, we might as well do a full review. TT Racer was released in 1986 by Digital Integration. The contents of the case include their dreaded lens lock. Ugh. Of course you get the tape and a lengthy manual, and this is where my heart sank. This is not a simple racer, it's a simulation. There are stats on the bikes themselves, and quotes from 2 riders, and a list of features that look impressive. All 12 Grand Prix circuits. Nice. Any game that has to explain the screen layout and control panel is going to be complex, and yes, this is one of those. The main screen is full of options, and if you're into motorbikes and racing, then you might like this. However, for someone who just wants to race, I just left everything as it was to get on with it. You can change engine size, change the track, the number of laps, and the number of racers you're playing against. And as mentioned earlier, you can race across the network with 7 real people. The keys are a bit odd. P and L to accelerate and brake, A and X to go left and right, and space will change gear depending on what you're doing, so if you're accelerating, you'll change up. You can also use a joystick, which may get a bit confusing. Hurtling off at the start, and the first corner had me crashing. No easy learning curve then, excuse the pun. You have to use the gears and bike as you would in real life, something that we all want to get away from when we're playing games, so a bit of a contradiction. The screen update, as you can see, is very slow, but the tilting effect is quite good. Sound is terrible, even on 1 to 8K machines, just a series of clicks really. If you crash, the game doesn't end. You just have to keep trying the gears and tilting the bike until you can get back on track, which is a real pain. The tracks have very little scenery. There's a tree here and there, and the odd sign and post. But there's no distant hills or anything like that. You do get to see other racers, usually as they're vanishing off into the distance. I spent a while trying to learn how to get round corners. Eventually I did manage to get round 3 laps, and even managed not to crash on a few corners. A game I would not want to play again. Not that I actually played it really, I spent more time on the grass really. Initially I just had endless crashes, accompanied by poor sound and slow frame rates. On the last playthrough I didn't crash as often as before, but it still didn't draw me in. Some people may like to work their way up the rankings, tweak the bike, and aim for a lifelike experience. Me though, nah, I'll pass on this one. Peter Packrat was originally released by Atari in 1985 into the arcades. This simple platform game sees you controlling Peter, a rat, having to collect various objects around the level and taking them back to the start. The original arcade game had 3 scrolling levels of trees, underground caves, and of course outside Peter Packrat's house, which seems to consist of a junkyard. Once you complete those, the same levels repeat, but with more objects to collect. You could throw the collected objects at chasing enemies, and there are a few interesting mechanics such as springboards, slopes and slides. The game was converted to various platforms, including the Spectrum. So here is Peter Packrat, released by Silverbird Software in 1989. At the start you are asked if you want scrolling levels. Answering yes will scroll each screen into place as you get to the edge. Answering no will just use flip screen. The game uses part monochrome graphics, but they are detailed and closely match the arcade. On the first level there are things like dustbins, fridges and old bikes. Further into the area and you get a bit more colour with yellow ground, so there's a mixture. As you move around you will find springboards, slides, pipes and water, and all can be used to move around the map. Moving around is simple, using left, right, up, down and fire. You have the option to throw things as well. Once you've collected them, like rocks for example, if you hit one of the flying enemies, you can then grab them and fly around the map for a set period of time. The enemies follow set patterns, so it's easy to work out, but there are some tricky moments when you can't see what's happening in the next screen. There's also a timer ticking down, but there's usually enough time to get all the objects, at least in the early levels. On 128K machines, you get a nice jolly tune playing, and the gameplay is really nice. All 3 levels are included in the Spectrum version too. I'm sure I played this a while back and didn't like it at all, but playing it now, I enjoyed the experience. Sometimes when using the slide I ran into things I couldn't see on the next screen, but really it's about taking risks and knowing the enemy patterns. You could work your way around the map quite slowly initially, being careful where you go. And that's a good idea until you learn everything. There are multiple routes to take and different locations for the objects. If you die, the objects that you are carrying are all dropped at that spot, so at least you can go back and get them again. Overall then, a pleasant surprise, especially for a budget game. This is Crazy Burger, released by Sergio Morales in 2025. Here you control a chef in a busy restaurant, although it looks more like a fast food joint to me. Customers arrive at the top, and you first have to see what they want by bumping into them. When you do this, their order will appear in the tickets below. Your job is now to get the order to them in a limited amount of time. Each day you have a target to reach as well, so it's all rushing about. The buns need toasting and the beef needs grilling. You grab these and take them one at a time to the correct areas and wait for the cooking process to end, and this is shown by the small circular timers. While you're waiting, you can go grab a drink, because that doesn't need cooking. You can take that up to the customer to complete that part of the order. By this time the buns and beef should be ready, so you can go and grab them one at a time and take them back up. Once your order is complete, you can hand it to the customer and they pay. Soon after, another customer arrives and it all starts again. Once the day ends, you'll be told that you have to finish your order and then see if you've earned enough to carry on. If not, it's game over. The orders get ever more complex as the game progresses, with different ingredients that you can see at the bottom of the screen in blue, all ready to come into play. Some of them need cooking, others don't. You can also have more than one customer at a time later on, and then things really get hectic. It's a great game and something different. Definitely worth playing. Packrat appeared in a September 1983 issue of Personal Computing News, and it was written by G. Creasy. The listing doesn't look too long or complicated. How wrong was I? In the game you play a bank robber who has to get the money away from the bank, crossing roads and avoiding traffic, doors and security guards. Looking at the page, it appears that this is a Frogger clone, and it wasn't until I started typing it out that I realised it had some machine code in it. I thought it was just data for graphics. Machine code always means bad things, because I can't debug it or fix it if there's a problem. Undeterred, I entered all the data statements, followed by the rest of the listing. The first run of the game gave me an out-of-data error, and a quick check through the user-definable graphic data identified a few typos and some missing data. This also meant the graphics were corrupt. Fixing these got rid of that error, and then, a crash. I suspected the machine code was to blame. I then checked each data statement and found a few typos again. Tried it again and it crashed again. Okay. More checking and more corrections, and I repeated this about 2 times before I finally got the game working. I also fixed some misaligned text on screen, and finally we can have a play. Yes, it's a typical Frogger game, but it's got smooth scrolling lanes of various things to avoid. There's no time limit, like the arcade game, and also, unlike that game, you just have to avoid things and move between them. There's no logs to jump on, and you can't move backwards, just left, right and forwards. The sound is okay, and the graphics look good as well, and the scrolling really makes the game stand out, especially for a type-in. A nice little game this. This is probably the first time it's been seen in over 30 years, and it will be available to download from my website shortly.